In March 2020, the federal government introduced the COVID Safe Harbour provisions, offering temporary relief to financially stressed businesses during COVID. Those provisions operated in parallel to the existing Safe Harbour provisions that were introduced back in 2017. Welcome to the latest edition of Call to Account. I'm Paul Croft, and with me today is Hannah Griffiths, the Head of Restructuring and Insolvency at Gilchrist Connell. Today she'll be sharing her insights into the existing and COVID Safe Harbour provisions, as well as providing some practical insights for directors who may be seeking to rely on the Safe Harbour provisions as defences to insolvent trading. Welcome, Hannah. How are you?
Thank you, Paul. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Before we jump into it, I think it might be great if you were to contrast the existing Safe Harbour provisions with those that operated during COVID.
Yes, certainly. So an essential ingredient for the COVID Safe Harbour is whether or not the debts incurred during the period of time that the legislation provides, being from the 25th of March 2020 until 31 December 2020, were in the ordinary course of business. So that is an essential key to the COVID Safe Harbour. There were no other eligibility criteria set in respect of the COVID Safe Harbour.
Right. And of course, the ordinary course of business in the middle of a pandemic is probably going to be quite different to the ordinary course of business outside of the pandemic.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, really,
correct.
In terms of what was going on for businesses during that time. It's difficult to provide any precise indication of what would be considered to be the ordinary course of business, and certainly we don't have judicial guidance on what that might be. The explanatory memorandum attached to this legislation, the Omnibus Act, doesn't provide any greater insight either, so we're left with what does ordinary mean.
Yeah.
Whilst the jury's out on what it must mean, most lawyers are sort of the view that ordinary means the ongoing trade of a business without additional expenditure taken on. So, for example, a business needs to trade by paying its employees, remitting their tax, and ensuring that their suppliers or contracts are serviced. It would be considered unordinary or extraordinary for a business to acquire large items of plant or equipment or rapidly expand their business. They may not be considered ordinary within the meaning of this legislation.
And if for directors who might be seeking to rely on either the COVID Safe Harbour provisions or the more general Safe Harbour provisions, what are the evidentiary requirements and how might they differ between the two provisions of Safe Harbour? Yeah,
absolutely. So the Safe Harbour as it stands now, and as it always did operate once it was incepted back in 2017, was that required directors to ensure that they maintained their books and records. It required directors to ensure that their employee entitlements were paid, and also that their taxation obligations were reported. It didn't mandate that they were met, however it was strongly suggested that they ought to be, and if those criteria were satisfied, then they would meet the eligibility to rely upon the Safe Harbour provisions as a defence to insolvent trading.
Right. And I think one of the misconceptions in the market is that Safe Harbour is a destination.
Yes, it's certainly not a destination. I've certainly never been there. I have certainly had it suggested to me that a director is in the Safe Harbour. It is not a form of external administration. It is not a place one can visit. It only operates as a defence to insolvent trading. And so how does a director access it? They meet the eligibility criteria, then they need to go to the next step, which is to develop a plan, a better outcome than the immediate appointment of an external administrator. So the comparison there is, does enacting this plan give rise to a better outcome than the immediate liquidation? Are creditors better off? Is the company better off? And those are the considerations the directors have to make.
And do the directors make that assessment of a better outcome before or after they speak to the advisor?
Look, there's usually some loose ideas about what they want to do, but really here, the other criteria, so not an eligibility criteria, but a requirement to rely upon it, is that an appropriately qualified advisor is retained by the company, the directors. So that is required. Again, jury's out on who that appropriately qualified advisor needs to be. Generally, people accept that it's a combination of a restructuring specialist, an accountant, who may also be a liquidator with restructuring expertise, and also an insolvency lawyer, a restructuring lawyer, who's able to work as a collaborative team with those directors to develop and implement a better outcome plan. But at the end of the day, that's a decision that sits with the directors of that company.
Yeah. And I think for directors of companies that may be teetering, one of the challenges must be that they've gone through this period of support from the government through COVID.
That's right.
They've come out of that. They may have had, they may have saved some cash. So that as that cash gets wound down, now they're finding themselves into this teetering position. What are the sorts of considerations that the directors should actually take into account in terms of their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So centrally, they need to be properly informed of the company's financial position. Regular and ongoing cash flow analysis and review, that is key. They need to make sure that they're maintaining financial records consistent with the size and nature of the company. That's also necessary in order to engage with the Safe Harbour provisions. They need to ensure that they take appropriate steps to prevent any misconduct by officers and also employees of the company that could impact upon the company's ability to pay debts. And they need to obtain advice from an appropriately qualified person who's provided with, they have been provided with sufficient information about the financial health of the business, and they are involved in developing and implementing a better outcome plan for that company based on the individual circumstances of it.
So I guess now we're a month out of all the government support. What are you beginning to see in the market?
Look, I've definitely seen an increased inquiry from directors as the stimulus from the federal government has been diluted because of JobKeeper scheme concluding, and also due to the taxation office starting to pursue the issuance of their director penalty notices based on outstanding taxation obligations. We have seen an increased inquiry. So directors are turning their mind to solvency a lot more. The lenders are also starting to require reassessment of their facilities, require payments on them. Commercial landlords are also now, after having to effectively be unpaid for a long period of time by many tenants, commercial tenants, they're starting to require rent to be paid. So all of these ingredients have resulted in directors being under a bit more pressure now, as they're really having to take a good hard look at whether or not this business can continue to trade, and so we have seen increased inquiries.
In terms of maybe either the size of the businesses, which are the ones that are more likely to take advantage of Safe Harbour?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my view, small and medium enterprises are not really well suited to Safe Harbour.
That's because?
That's just because there is not enough scope to change how they improve the position vis-a-vis the immediate liquidation. There's not enough ability to change the operations or systems or manage contracts or restructure how the affairs are conducted.
To come up with a better outcome.
To come up with a better outcome for the stakeholders, whereas a bigger company is better equipped because they've got a greater likelihood of being able to raise capital, change how they're doing business, remove contracts that might not be performing or wind them down, restructure how many staff they've got servicing certain parts of their business. So there's just a lot more that can be done. Renegotiating contracts to more favourable terms. They've got more leverage, I think, it generally, rather than a mum and dad smaller business. That's not to say that there aren't restructuring options available to SMEs. It's just not, Safe Harbour's not best suited to it. There's a whole another segment probably for you, Paul, at another time about the small business restructuring reforms that have also been introduced earlier this year, which probably is well suited for
to those
SMEs,
businesses.
but certainly larger businesses are well equipped to be able to engage with and get benefit from the Safe Harbour provisions.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Hannah. It's been great chatting to you, and we'll see you next time.